Hello, my name is David North. I'm the national chairman of the Socialist Equality Party and the chairman of the editorial board of the World Socialist website. Tonight, we're going to have a webinar discussion with Momodou, who has been Momodou Taal, who has been subject to an order to be seized by the U.S. government. He has been fighting two essentially illegal dictatorial executive orders issued by Trump. He has challenged their constitutionality in federal court. And these lawsuits were brought against him in retaliation for the lawsuit which he filed against Trump and his essentially gangster fascistic government. Also speaking tonight will be his attorney, Eric Lee, who represented him the day before yesterday in federal court, opposing the attempts of ICE to seize Momodou Taal. And we will also be speaking with Joseph Kishore, the National Secretary of the Socialist Equality Party. Before I ask Momodou to speak about his situation and also ask Eric to explain the legal issue, I think we all have to recognize that we are meeting under extraordinary that Momodou faces, the situation which Mahmoud Khalil faces, and most recently, Rumeysa Azturk, who was grabbed off the streets of Boston on Tuesday night. These are events which I suppose Americans would have thought only possible in Nazi Germany, or during the dictatorship which existed in Argentina during the 1970s and in Chile during the 1970s under Pinochet, where students were regularly grabbed, high school students, college students, many of them tortured and even murdered. Now, this is the danger we now confront in the United States. And to be frank, it is one which is expanding rapidly throughout the globe. Even as we speak, students and workers are protesting against mass arrests which have taken place in Turkey. Police have been called out in force to intimidate, to grab, to arrest people. And one can be certain that the president of Turkey, Erdogan, has been directly inspired by Trump, as Trump has been inspired by Erdogan. And all of them have been inspired and collaborated with the Netanyahu government, which has been carrying out a genocide in Gaza, and in fact, beyond. Now, these are events of immense international significance. The fight to defend democratic rights has acquired an extraordinary urgency. So tonight we will be discussing what is now taking place, and also discussing a political strategy which is necessary to confront this situation. But I'd like to begin, first of all, by asking Momodou to describe his situation. As a way of introduction, Momodou is, as I said, a PhD student at Cornell University. How many years have you been studying at Cornell, and what has been the subject of your PhD studies?
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I am in my third year now, so this will be 3 years studying my PhD in the Department of Africana Studies, as you mentioned, at Cornell University. So I focus on political economy, and I focus on questions of sovereignty. Particularly looking at West Africa as my case of study, but also more broadly, just, I guess, Marxist political economy more broadly.
How did you become interested in the subject?
Great question. It's been a journey. I think I've always somewhat been interested in politics. I definitely had like a political background, my family, etc. But I think definitely of 2020 with the BLM uprising in the US, and then I kind of was a bit frustrated with, I guess, more liberal discourses on race. and liberal discourses on and what to be done next, basically. So I kind of was introduced to a tradition of my friends and now comrades who are Marxists at the time, and they kind of said, again, what you're missing in your analysis is a material analysis. And I was like, okay, what's a material analysis? And I just went down a deep rabbit hole, starting off by one of the first books I read, I would say, is Black Jacobins by C.L.R. James, and then, kept reading about Marxist literature and political economy. And I was like, okay, this was it. Was the missing thing for my analysis. And this not just gave me a tools to understand and interpret the world, but also how to make that actionable as well. And I decided I wanted to pursue a PhD in doing that as well.
You live both in Gambia and in Britain.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, so it's interesting. I'm a dual citizen, but I was born in the Gambia, but I moved to the UK when I was 3 months old. So I've pretty much been in the UK my whole entire life. I've gone back to Gambia regularly, but UK is pretty much home.
I understand your family was active in Gambian politics.
Yeah, my great grandfather was the first president of the Gambia, and also my uncles have been like ministers, but also my uncles have been political dissidents as well, which always makes for fun dinner table talks.
Yes, and Africa has itself presently been the scene of enormous social struggles.
Yeah.
In Kenya and Nigeria, and also in South Africa.
Yeah, exactly, and also in the Sahel region as well. And there's a lot of transformation and movement right now, particularly across the continent. So yeah, I mean, my family's always been involved. They're still involved in their 60s and 70s, but they're still very involved politically. And I think I get a lot of that political fight from them.
And then you just to be clear, you then studied undergraduate in Britain?
Yeah, so I did my undergraduate in the UK. I did an LLB, so Bachelor of Laws. And then I moved to Egypt for about 7 years to study Arabic and theology. And then I came to the US.
And when did you come to the United States?
In 2022, August, to start the PhD. So I think that
and just to be clear, what is your legal status? How did you come into the United States? What is the...
Yeah, I mean, I came on an F1 visa, the usual process. You get given an I-20, a kind of proof of study. You take it to your embassy. The embassy approves it. It's like a lot of background checks. And then, I was approved. And then I was allowed to come to the US, and I entered with no problems.
So tell me, Charles, what is the chain of events which unfolded during the past several months, which led you to the present situation, and how did it actually develop?
Yeah, I think ever since of October 2023, we've had like a sustained campaign on campus calling for divestment, right? I think many universities kind of followed suit in that we are asking, which I think is a very reasonable ask, and also actually in line with our own school's divestment policy, calling for divestment from war, calling for divestment from weapons manufacturers. And that was like a sustained campaign. That was by way of, civil disobedience, disruptions, etc. First and foremost, when we had the crescendo moment with the encampments, I was a negotiator on behalf of the encampment. And what was the tactic from many universities was to suspend the negotiators. After that, I was reinstated with some conditions. And then we had another protest at September 18th, 2024. And this was to bring down the weapons manufacturers recruitment drive, in which two companies we were targeting for divestment were present, L3 Harris and Boeing. I was there for about 5 minutes and then I left. Upon leaving, I then received an email that I have been suspended. I was called into a meeting. The meeting essentially said that, you'll be de-enrolled within 48 hours and you have to leave the country soon. Promptly, there was a huge backlash, a huge outcry. I was able to not be de-enrolled, keep my status with a lot of conditions on me, restricting my movements. But essentially, that's what placed target on my back, I would say. Cornell's decision to be so harsh and repressive in their tactics against students placed targets on their back. And we're seeing now with my lawsuit directly quotes from Cornell's disciplinary process on me. So fast forward, we heard that Trump was going to clamp down on pro-Palestinian protests. He then signs executive orders. My legal team and I thought I was going to become a target, which we have been proven correct now, given what we've seen with Mahmoud Khalil and others and before. Then we filed a lawsuit challenging the constitutionality and legality of the executive orders. And then the government has a timeline, but we have a timeline as well. It does seem in my reading of the situation that I am now being retaliated against, and they're acting in retribution against me for filing the lawsuit. And now, subsequently, I've had my visa revoked. I've been told I must surrender to ICE, and yeah, we're waiting for hearing back from the judge again now.
What happens if worse comes to worse and you surrender to ICE? What are they planning to do? Put you on a plane, send you back to Britain, or what's the situation you confront?
It's unknown at this time. I mean, I think the scariest thing we saw, you mentioned Remaisa at top of this show. It's scary. I mean, Remaisa having unidentified masked men grab you off the street, and then you're not able to contact anyone for 24 hours. I mean, we've seen folks being taken to Louisiana. Louisiana seems like we're taking most people in the middle of the night. We've seen people, an extreme example, being taken to El Salvador, for example. So it's really unknown, uncertain at this time. I don't know what will happen to me. I don't know where I will be taken. And I think,
So you don't even know. You don't know for sure whether you would be actually deported or you may just be put into prison.
Yeah.
And made incommunicado.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely amongst the realm possibility. So I think that's why everyone should be outraged at this thing. I mean, you don't have to agree with certain viewpoints, but this is supposed to be the bedrock of a democracy, the First Amendment ability to speak and criticize. If people are being disappeared, and it's not because like we're hearing they have committed crimes or even allegations of crimes. Remaisa wrote an op-ed. She wrote an op-ed which called for divestment from weapons manufacturers, and now she's being disappeared. I think that's horrific and horrendous.
At this point, I just would like to ask Eric if he could expand on the legal issues and legal implications of what is taking place. Eric?
Yes, hi, thank you. Momodou's case is a test case. It's a trial run. The Trump administration plans to do to many, many more people, permanent residents, visa holders, citizens, what it's trying to do to Momodou and what it's trying to do to the other students, which it's snatching off of college campuses and public sidewalks and their homes across this country right now. I think the term disappearance is an entirely appropriate one, both from a political and from a legal standpoint, because we are now in the situation where the government is openly admitting that it is attempting to detain Mr. Taal because of his attendance at a protest in August 2024, because they identified him as a result of the 2 executive orders as a pro-Palestinian activist. And if those are bases for getting taken out of your home, off your campus and locked up in a jail somewhere 1,000 miles away, like what happened to Mahmoud Khalil, then we're in an entirely different period of American history. We're supposed to mark 250 years anniversary since the founding of the country in 1776 next year, and the writing of the Declaration, the great historic document and achievement, revolutionary achievement of mankind. And in that, as in the run up to this, we have a government which is moving very rapidly to establish a dictatorship. And the courts are obviously there are divisions. There has been pushback in certain courts in certain district courts to the efforts to grab people. For example, in New York City with the Columbia student whose temporary restraining order was granted yesterday. But ultimately, the real resolution of the attack on freedom of speech, the attack on the right to redress grievances to the government, which is what Momodou did when he filed this lawsuit last Saturday, that's going to be defended by the population. That's where the issue is ultimately going to be resolved. I'll just say one thing about the executive orders. Our lawsuit is challenging the 2 executive orders promulgated by the Trump administration on January 20th and 29th. Together, they say that non-citizens, regardless of how long they've lived in the country, can be deported for having a quote unquote hostile attitude toward the U.S. government, toward American government institutions, toward American culture. And also if they criticize the state of Israel in the second executive order. There is no historical precedent for such a broad restriction on freedom of speech. The closest example is the Alien Sedition Acts of 1798, the hated anti-canon of the illegalization of criticism of the government. But even there, not to make light of the implications of the Alien and Sedition Act, that legislation only banned libel against the government. These executive orders ban telling the truth. These are not orders that come from a position of strength. They are a direct attempt to shut the valve on left-wing, anti-imperialist, socialist, pro-Palestinian, anti-genocide views to not only non-citizens, but those citizens, those millions and millions of us who want to hear those views and have a right to hear those views.
I'll come back to the legal issues shortly. I would like to, at this point, just ask Joe Kishore if he could just perhaps comment on the broader context within which this is taking place, and of course about which the World Socialist website has been writing extensively. Joe?
Yeah.
What are the essential political issues which rise here?
Yeah, well, I think one, the systematic effort by the Trump administration to establish a presidential dictatorship, which has been developing over the course of the past 2 months, beginning with the executive orders, which Eric and Momodou referred to, that were signed on the first day, which essentially declare the First Amendment does not apply to non-citizens. Through to the invocation of the Alien Enemies Act and the deportation of hundreds of migrants, accompanied by the direct defiance of judicial orders. Throughout this process, the president, the Trump administration, has asserted unchecked executive powers to override existing law, to override court decisions, that there are no constraints on the grounds that the United States is supposedly engaged in a war. This is a systematic, deliberate campaign of the Trump administration, and that has to be understood. And you have now, as others have referred to, people just being seized off the streets. This is what the Trump administration is doing. I think in terms of the political issues, this has to really be seen as a absolute condemnation of the Democratic Party, which is doing nothing to oppose it. Momodou referred to the role of Cornell University in creating the framework for what Trump is now doing by seeking to discipline him during the protests against the genocide last year. Of course, that was done under the Democratic Party. These administrations are close ties to the Democratic Party. Columbia University, which recently capitulated, close ties to the Democratic Party. The Biden administration was overseeing, financing, politically justifying the genocide, as well as the attacks on protesters in the United States, bringing forward the lie, which is now being resurrected by this gang of fascists in the Trump administration, that opposition to Israel is anti-Semitic and opposition to the genocide is anti-Semitic. All of that was, the basis was created by the Democratic Party, which supports it. And just 2 weeks ago, the Democrats passed what we referred to as the Enabling Act, granting funding for the Trump administration after the intervention of Chuck Schumer. And what has happened over the past 2 weeks, an escalating attack on democratic rights, the persecution of Momodou, the seizure of students, the Alien Enemies Act, and the escalating war on the working class, which is underlying all of this. And that, of course, is critical to understand. I hope we'll be discussing it further, of course, in this meeting, but this is all connected to a war which is being waged on the working class, which is the fundamental target. They're destroying the Department of Education, targeting Social Security, tens of thousands of health workers fired, announced fired today. This is the character of this administration, which is a government of the oligarchy. And that's the working class that has to be mobilized in response.
I think I'd like to ask Momodou some more about the protests which took place and the actual content of the issues that you raised and the form they took. I think this is very critical. I'll just say before you reply, of course, those who are of my generation, I recall very well an incident that took place in Cornell in April 1969. I don't know whether you're familiar with it, where a number of African-American students occupied, was it Willard Hall in...
Willis Strait takeover.
Right. Well, it's I suppose now almost an event of mythical significance in the history of Cornell. I mean, it was an armed occupation, as a matter of fact. Ultimately, as I recall, the students won their demands, and perhaps not so surprisingly, as often is the fate of middle-class radicals, some of those who participated very prominently went on to have illustrious careers in corporate America. Now, there have been no guns and there's been no violence at Cornell, but I think you should review what's actually happened and what your positions were.
Thank you so much for the question. I think it's important to note, so that Willis Strait takeover is the reason why I'm at Cornell, because the Willis Strait takeover, the demand was to establish Africana studies at Cornell University. And that was a 36-hour armed occupation of a building, which didn't end in violence, but, you know, police were mobilized and there was arms involved. And then that resulted in the establishment of my department. And it's interesting, we always see the way the liberal cooptation of these these moments, and they are then defanged of any radicality and then sold back to us, because we hear ad nauseum that Cornell celebrates the Willis Strait takeover. We hear ad nauseum that the Cornell celebrates its rich history of campus protest. But when students do not even come as close to what happened in the 60s, the levels of repression they're met with is actually insane. And just to recount what happened at those events, first I gave a speech outside. We then walk inside. We then go inside the Statler Hotel. There was a brief confrontation with police. From my perspective, it looked like the police kind of just moved out of the way. Video footage shows there was like a little tussle between, but it wasn't like no one was hurt. But again, I went inside after the crowd. Went inside. I was in there for about 5 minutes. There was some pots banging, some pots and pans, some chants were made, some speeches were made, and then it got shut down. Afterwards, we got told people felt afraid, people felt unsafe, uncomfortable. People suffered a loss of hearing because of the banging of the pots and pans. But for all intents and purposes, this was nothing out of the ordinary for civil disobedience. There was no violence. There was no allegations of violence. And I think that's where we are now. And I think given the nature of the escalation to the fact that that is now being seen as a deportable offense, makes me have to step back and question what is really happening here. It can't just be on the merits of or the actions that have been taken by protesters, but rather because, as it's been said so many times here, it ties into a broader critique of US foreign policy, of the state of Israel, the genocide, the working class more broadly. And I think these are what is feeding into the repression.
Can you just expand, though, on your own views of the situation in Gaza, so they're clearly understood and you have a chance to explain them in what you have said in the protests in which you've participated? Absolutely.
I mean, I think for me, I see Gaza and the situation of Israel for what I believe to be an issue of settler colonialism. I understand that there has been the historic land of Palestine was given for Jewish homeland by the British Mandate, the Balfour Declaration. I understand that in order for this homeland to have existed, there has been the Nakba, the great catastrophe of 1948, which coincides with the establishment of the state of Israel, in that almost 1 million Palestinians were forcibly expelled from their homelands for the state of Israel to be created. I understand as well that it's also important to note, although it was backed by United Nations at the time, many of the countries did not vote because they were still colonized. So I don't think that reflected the global opinion of the time. I understand that continuing after the Nakba, that Israel has operated, and according to Amnesty International, B'Tselem, and others, human rights organizations, it operates an apartheid state. I know that Palestine has not been granted statehood, and I know that also every time Palestinians have had various moments of uprising and resistance, Whether they are non-violent or violent, they're always met with a heavy level of violence. And I think what we're seeing now more recently has been quite rightly declared by the Special Rapporteur, Francesca Albanese, and so many others, to be a genocide, right? And I think just the sheer total number of death toll, some of the largest number of slaughter of kids in living memory in a war, in a conflict, I think the material facts speak for themselves. Now we can interpret, add meaning to why this is the case, but it's very clear that, as you started the show, Israel is an expansionary state. It is fighting basically on 7 fronts. It, for me, is one of the, alongside US imperialism, is one of the most decisive factors in terms of destabilization of West Asia, of the Middle East. And that's how I understand my politics. And I think I come at this through very different angles, but I think it's quite clear what's going on. And I think that anyone of conscience should see what is happening and stand up for the rights of Palestinians.
About actually the mood at Cornell, the type of relations you've had with students and the sentiments which have existed there.
Yeah, I mean, it's been definitely a mixed bag in many ways. I mean, there are many folks on campus who describe themselves as Zionists, and I've had debates and heated discussions with them about certain topics. And we've had debates through the student assembly and more informal debates at protests. But also we've had so many. I mean, we've been able to sustain a mass movement, even though level of repression. Even just 2 weeks ago, there were 17 students arrested at Cornell for being pro-Palestinian at an event that took place on campus. So I think it's a mixed bag, but I do think the numbers have definitely increased and people are losing their fear. And I've got a lot of support, and even from my Jewish comrades. I think it's important. I mean, I'm being painted out as a bigot or demagogue, but you know, many of my Jewish comrades have come out quite forthrightly and said that not in our name. And whether they agree or disagree with every single thing that I've said, they cannot allow their faith to be weaponized and instrumentalized to disappear people and silence people. And I think that's been a source of quite solace and comfort as well. Yeah.
But I think recently, Eric, you wrote an article, the World Socialist website, which discussed the issue of the state of exception in Germany. And it would be, I think, worthwhile to review that and the analogy to the situation being developed here in the United States. Eric?
You cut out a little bit there at the beginning. Apologies, but
I'm asking you about the state of exception. I know you have written about that and discussed that. I don't think it's something which is well understood here in the United States, but it is, I think, something people will be hearing about much more frequently. What was the state of exception? What is the theory behind it?
The theory behind the state of exception is it's an illegitimate pseudo-legal theory that was developed by a Nazi jurist named Carl Schmitt in Germany in the 1930s, which said that under conditions of an emergency, a social emergency, social disorder, the leader, the Führer, has the ultimate power to decide, in order to, quote unquote, in order to protect the law, to decide whether the law applies at all. Trump began. This is the state of exception that Donald Trump is attempting to implement here in the United States. He has blatantly violated the 14th Amendment by attempting to restrict birthright citizenship, which is one of the most fundamental rights established through the American Civil War, the Second American Revolution. But the state of exception that Trump is trying to implement is one which is aimed at taking away the rights of the entire population. And that's why Momodou's situation is so important, because if you can't criticize the government, and also just this point has to be clarified from a legal standpoint, non-citizens who are in the United States have the protection of the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights does not protect the rights of citizens, it protects the right of the people. The right of the people shall not be restricted. And the arguments that the Trump administration is putting out, and frankly, these are the same arguments that the Biden administration used to deport people, and that the Obama administration used beforehand to suppress the due process rights of non-citizens in the United States, is a total lie. And any attempt to start saying that those who belong to the people, regardless of whether they're citizens or not, don't have the protection of the Bill of Rights, then you've fundamentally changed the relationship between the government and the population. Rights cannot simply be taken away. They're not simply privileges granted by the beneficence of the President of the United States. And that's fundamentally what the creation of a state of exception is aimed at. But it's a pseudo legal theory, and it's a politically reactionary myth that we reject entirely.
Well, I think to call it a pseudo legal theory is almost a compliment. The state of exception, it was a political conception which gave Hitler and his gangsters the right to kill anyone they wanted to kill. As a matter of fact, and I think this is important, especially in the context of what is now taking place. For Carl Schmitt, the apotheosis, the greatest triumph of the new Nazi jurisprudence was Hitler's carrying out of the Night of the Long Knives, where almost publicly he ordered and actually himself participated in the murder of several hundred people, including long-standing political opponents or even former allies. And it should be recalled that not long ago, the Supreme Court, and this was before Trump became president, issued a ruling which basically said that the president of the United States is above the law and exempt from all punitive actions or responses to his violation of basic laws, including murder. And there's one other, since we're talking about Nazi Germany, there's one other example which can be given, and I'm thinking about it in relationship to the disappearances of students grabbed and deposited somewhere in Louisiana, and who knows where the next places are going to be. But there was another term used to describe people disappearing, and it was the so-called Nacht und Nebel order, night and fog. People disappeared into the night and fog. No one knew what became of them. People were executed, and I think, and often the families didn't even know about it until they got a box in the mail with bullets, and they were told to pay for the bullets used to kill their family members. Now, we haven't reached that point yet, but it is a very, very slippery slope, and without a powerful response within the working class and among youth, and among all those who take democratic rights seriously, that's where we're heading. And in this context, I would like, again, to come back to Joe and to say more about the actual developments socially and politically in the United States, and particularly the response of the Democratic Party. I mean, today there is a lead article on the World Socialist website which takes note of the outrage which the Democratic Party is expressing about the security lapse surrounding the bombing of Yemen. They're not complaining about the fact that innocent people were bombed and murdered in Yemen, which has already suffered over the last decade hundreds of thousands of deaths, but they're outraged that American security may have been, military security may have been violated by the Trump administration. That's their flagship issue. But they're not saying anything about the massive assault on democratic rights which are now taking place. And so if you could expand upon this somewhat, and the response of the Socialist Equality Party to this. What is the party proposing as an effective response?
Yeah, well, as we've written in the World Socialist website, there are two forms of opposition to the Trump administration. There is the opposition in the working class, and there is opposition within sections of the ruling class. And the opposition within the ruling class, within the state, within the Democratic Party, is focused primarily on questions of foreign policy. and this goes back to the first Trump administration, the first impeachment, which was over Ukraine. Concerns that Trump is not an adequate steward of the imperialist foreign policy interests of the American ruling class. So there is that conflict within the state, but the Democratic Party supports, in fact, the attack on the working class, the attack on democratic rights. It created the framework for it, and it's doing nothing to oppose it. So there's the opposition within the state, and there's the opposition in the working class and among youth, which is of a entirely different character, which is opposed to this government. It must be developed in opposition to this government on a class basis. This is a government of the oligarchy, the destruction of democratic rights, the turn to dictatorship, which is a global process, is bound up with one, the extraordinary growth of social inequality. We have a tiny handful of billionaires which control the global economy. People like Elon Musk, who's playing a direct role in this administration and its wrecking operation against every regulation, every social reform, every social program that in any way detracts from the profits of the capitalist ruling elite. It's connected. So the destruction of democracy is connected to one, the extreme growth of social inequality and this oligarchy, which controls the economy and politics, and two, the growth of war, the escalating imperialist war, which developed under Biden with the war against Russia and the genocide in Gaza, and now is being continued under Trump. And of course, you have, in the very direct sense, the seizure of students and young people opposed to a genocide. Let us recall that that is the target. Individuals who've been involved in protests against an ongoing genocide. But they are preparing the framework for opposing all, or for destroying democratic rights of anyone opposed to the imperialist policies of the ruling class and of this oligarchy. So in terms of what we propose, well, one, we propose the development of a movement in the working class, the vast majority of the population, which has no interest in escalating war, is opposed to the rampage of the oligarchy, and has to be developed as an independent force. We propose a development of a movement in the working class, the development of rank and file committees, independent of a corrupt trade union apparatus, which is going along with and in fact supporting all of this, and the development of a very powerful movement in the working class to defend democracy. The last point I would just make, which I think is very important, we have been going into among auto workers, for example, and taking the case of Momodou, of Khalil, and explaining what is happening and encouraging opposition and getting a very significant response. There is a constituency for democracy in the American working class. The traditions have not been forgotten. But there is a powerful basis of support for democratic rights in the working class, but that can only be developed as a movement against this government and the oligarchy that stands behind it.
Momodou, we're getting some questions in. I have one question I'll just read to you, and perhaps you can answer. It says from Justin. He says, "Thank you for talking to us today, Mr. Taal. My question is, do you think you can seek asylum at the British or Gambian embassies? I'm sure leaving voluntarily wouldn't be allowed, but surrendering to ICE sounds incredibly dangerous and ill-advised. Can you just say, are those options even available to you?"
I have to defer to Eric, to be honest. I think at the moment it's a complex legal situation, and we will comply with the law, of course. But I think in terms of what we're actually going to do, I think I have to defer to Eric to speak on that.
Yes.
Eric, just could you...
Yeah, we're not going to speak on specific where Momodou said it right, but yeah.
I've asked the question only, again, to emphasize to the listeners and those who are viewing this, to understand the incredibly precarious situation that Momodou is facing, that Khalil Mahmoud is facing, Rumeysa is facing.
Yeah.
And to place this in a, and this is a matter which should be of extreme concern, and I want to just emphasize that while the intention of this program is to inform, it is also to mobilize.
Yeah.
Please don't watch this and think you can just sit back and do nothing more than wish, everyone the best. No, this is a deadly serious situation, and no one should underestimate this. But I would like to also just stress as well that the situation which Momodou faces, these are perhaps the most known cases, and they're of course bound up with the major controversies which surround, or the outrage which surrounds the mass murder being implemented by Israel with the full support of the major imperialist powers.
Mm-hmm.
But there are tens of thousands and really hundreds of thousands of people who are immigrants in the United States who are under daily threat. And we have already been informed of the fact that people are being dispatched to essentially death camps in El Salvador, and who knows where else. So the full scope of what is taking place must clearly be fully understood. I'll just ask another question, and which basically follows up from the point I made. How does this case? Are there any specific distinctions between this case and the case in Colombia in terms of material importance?
So you cut out.
Which are different.
I think I got your question. Were you talking about the distinction between myself and Mahmoud?
Yes. Are there? I mean, are they material differences, or are they just simply variants of this, essentially the same operation?
I think the main differences, material differences, would be two. Mahmoud is a green card holder, whereas I'm on an F1 visa, and Mahmoud is married to an American citizen, whereas I'm not. So I think those two, which we would suspect that would offer a bit more protection to Mahmoud, but we've seen that that's not the case.
Well, it doesn't seem that anybody has any protection. Law seems to be the least important. I would like to perhaps just ask again, Joe, what specifically would we call upon students and workers now to do? How can they express their support specifically for Mahmoud Khalil and for Momodou Taal and for Rumeysa, who find themselves in this situation? What should students do? What are we advocating that members of the IYSSC do?
Well, I think the development of opposition on the campuses is of course very important. The holding of meetings, demonstrations. It is significant that the seizure of this young woman in Boston was met with demonstrations of thousands just last night of young people, of students. There's enormous opposition to what is happening. The International Youth and Students for Social Equality, the IYSSC, is developing a movement of young people on campuses and in the working class to oppose this assault on democratic rights and defend these students. There should be meetings, there should be resolutions, and all sorts of actions to oppose the attack on Momodou and others. But our perspective is that the has to be mobilized is the working class, to turn to the factories, the workplaces, to connect the fight of defense of democratic rights and opposition to dictatorship to the mobilization of the working class, to go out to the plants, to talk to workers, to mobilize workers, and have an orientation. That is the social force. It is the social force on an international scale that can oppose dictatorship, can oppose capitalism. I think it is important to underscore in this context the role of the trade union apparatus. The United Auto Workers, which actually does organize graduate students, many graduate students throughout the country, issued a statement just yesterday in which they said the following: "We applaud the Trump administration for stepping up to end the free trade disaster that has devastated working class communities for decades," directly supporting the trade war measures that Trump has just announced, particularly in the auto industry. First of all, it's a fraud that this has anything to do with the interests of auto workers. That's a complete lie. It's going to lead to the destruction of tens of thousands of jobs and enormously intensify the exploitation of the working class in the United States and Mexico, Canada, and internationally. But the United Auto Workers is saying this, openly aligning with the Trump administration and using students and graduate students, including members of the UAW itself. And it just so nakedly exposes the role of the trade union apparatus in suppressing the class struggle and blocking the development of a movement against this government, which is waging a war on the working class. In terms of what the SEP, the IYSC are fighting for, there has to be a very powerful movement against this. There has to be alerting of students and young people as to what is happening, statements of opposition, meetings, demonstrations. But the basic question is one of orienting towards the development of a mass movement in the working class against the Trump government, against the Democratic Party, against the trade union apparatus through the development of organizations of struggle, and animated by a clear political perspective. I mean, the idea that anything can be done without addressing the fact that an oligarchy controls this society. It controls this government. It operates through this government and this state. That is the issue. The wealth has to be expropriated. Their control over the economy and over politics has to be ended in the United States and internationally. That is the basic question, and it's the working class that has to fight for that. It will fight for it is, and we're fighting to develop that consciously.
Well, we have limited time because I know that both Eric and Momodou face a very, very tight deadline this evening. I just want to add to what Joe has said, that it must be understood that what we are witnessing is a manifestation of a historical crisis of the world capitalist system. The United States is at the very heart of this crisis. I think after what we've observed over the past several months, the old adage, it can't happen here, that somehow democracy exists in some sort of privileged state in the United States, is being shattered. And also, it is important to understand that the cause of this is not simply the evil Trump. This crisis has been long in the making. The last 35 years have been dominated by a steady escalation of militarism, endless wars, escalating attacks on democratic rights, the legitimization of torture, targeted assassinations. This is the culmination of all these processes. And in the end, what is it about? This is not something entirely new in history. What we are witnessing is the resurgence of imperialism in its most brutal forms. It is a sort of experience which was passed through with horrific consequences frequently in the 20th century in the form of World War I and World War II. And it might be noted that in just a few weeks, in May, we will be observing 80 years since the end of World War II, the end of the Nazi regime. And yet, everywhere throughout the world, we are witnessing a resurgence of fascism, that is, capitalist barbarism. What must be understood? When we're speaking of the case of Momodou, Khalil, Rumeysa, Bogdan Siratyuk in Ukraine, the students and workers who are being arrested in Turkey, this is part of a broader international crisis. And the decisive issue is whether in this crisis it will be resolved on the basis of a fundamental transformation of society. I think any strategy for overcoming this crisis must keep in mind two fundamental points. Ultimately, this is a struggle against the capitalist system, and it is for that very reason, it is international in dimension. I think all the cases we're discussing tonight, the cases of Momodou, very much personify the international character. The protest took place over the atrocities in Gaza, supported by all the imperialist powers. American students are opposing it and demonstrating it against it. And the response of the state is repression. And that repression is part of a broader campaign to wipe out democratic rights in the United States. So what we're putting forward, what the World Socialist website advances, the Socialist Equality Party here in the United States, and all the sections of the International Committee of the Fourth International throughout the world, is the mobilization of the working class on an internationalist and socialist program. That is the critical issue. It is a question of perspective, because on the basis of a perspective, you can fight, and we can win. Never forget the actions of the Trump administration are the actions of a regime in crisis. The American ruling class has reached such a point of degeneracy and bankruptcy that they find themselves represented by a convicted felon, a gangster, a crook, who embodies personally all that is backward in American capitalism and indeed in global capitalism. And it is a situation which is not unique to the United States. The names change, the faces may be different, but in fact, all the actions being taken by these governments to suppress freedom of speech, to suppress critical thought, to threaten those who protest against inequality, poverty, all the other conditions which we confront in the world, their inability to advance any progressive solution to these massive social problems on a world scale, demonstrate that the time has come to create a new system based on equality, based on the utilization of the vast resources which actually exist to solve the problems of the people and put an end to all the causes of oppression. I'd like to thank Momodou for having come on this program this evening. I want to express again our solidarity. We will continue to wage this fight. You have vast support throughout the world. You are not alone. Halil is not alone. Ramesh is not alone. All those who are fighting are part of a growing international offensive. I know, and everyone should understand that. We take this very seriously. Momodou, you don't face a simple situation, but you're taking up the fight, and everyone who's watching this should be very aware of the responsibilities that they have. It's not just a matter of sending best wishes to Momodou. Join the fight. It's our responsibility to make sure that his rights are defended and that he is freed from these threats which he faces, and that far from being persecuted, his courage is welcomed and a source of admiration for people throughout the United States and internationally. And I'm sure Eric himself has a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
We don't want to hold you any longer. We promised we would complete this within the hour so you can get back to work. And I also want to thank all our listeners. Again, if you want to contact us, please go to worldsocialistwebsite.org. If we, of course, always need contributions to finance the work of the WSWS, so go to wsws.org/donate. And of course, when you go to worldsocialistwebsite.org, there are contact forms. Please sign them, get back to us. We will contact you and tell you how you can help us join the fight in defense of Momodou, against all those who are under attack, and against the broader struggle against imperialist war. So please contact us. Don't stand on the sidelines. Get involved. Thank you very much.